I'm excited to be sharing this tutorial with you. As you can see, it's a map. It's not just any map, it's a map using COVID-19 data to show confirmed cases from around the world. Countries with the most cases are shown in a dark red, while those with fewer cases have a lighter color. This map is also interactive and lets you click on the various countries. When you click on a country, you're presented with the country name and the number of cases. We even have a nice legend at the bottom that shows you the various ranges. Starting on the left, we have lighter colors to represent smaller numbers, while on the right, we have darker colors to represent the higher numbers. If you're wondering what this type of map is called, it's called a Choropleth map. It uses different shading and color to display some statistic. In this case, we're using COVID-19 confirmed cases. This is going to be an awesome tutorial. We're going to be using React hooks, React Leaflet, GeoJson, Parse, and a tiny bit of Bootstrap to make a loading screen. To top things off, we'll be creating an elegant, well-architected solution that I'm sure you're going to be proud of. If you enjoy my videos, click that like button, subscribe, and share. Let's get started by taking a look at a high-level diagram of our solution. These are the components that we're going to be building. Naturally, we have our app component. Our app component, we're going to be creating a COVID-19 component. If we have no data, we're going to show a little loading screen. We're going to build that loading screen with Bootstrap, and I'll just show you how easy that is. If we have data, we'll go ahead and display our COVID-19 map. We'll also display our legend. How do we get that data? Well, the COVID-19 component goes ahead and gets that data from the internet. It asks for the COVID data over here, which we get from Johns Hopkins. And then it also asks from the map data, which we'll be using a GeoJson file for. A little bit of a lower level look into this application, going from here to here. You'll notice that most of this is the same. We have no data, display loading. We have data, get that map, display that legend. Now, to get that data, we don't want COVID-19 to do all that work, go to the internet, get the data, display the data. It's kind of breaking single responsibility. We don't want COVID-19 to have that responsibility, so it's going to delegate. How does it delegate? Well, we create a new class called load countries task. COVID-19 will ask load countries task to get that information for it so it doesn't have to worry about it. This will make the code inside COVID-19 a lot smaller because we're moving the code into a task. That task will go ahead and get, as we said, the COVID data, the map data, give it back to COVID-19, and away we go. Other than that, the other thing that we've added is the entities and domains. So we're going to create some objects, some classes to represent the information that we get from the internet. This solution will require two pieces of data. Map data contained in a GeoJson file that's going to be used to draw the map, and COVID-19 data. Over here we have our map data, and as I mentioned, that's a GeoJson file. That GeoJson file, as you can see I have a Wikipedia article over here, is just a JSON file. It's a JSON file that describes how to draw the map on the screen. So this is a list of features. So each one of these features is going to be a country. And each country is going to have basically two main properties. One is the geometry. How do I draw it on the screen? And that's just going to be a list of points. React Leaflet will take those points, take this information, and draw the country on the screen. In addition to geometry, we also have properties. Now that could be the country name, the population, number of confirmed COVID cases, any information that you want or that you've collected. You can find GeoJson files that contain this information for you. Or you can make your own GeoJson file by extending maybe one that already exists. So we're going to be grabbing a GeoJson file, one that has that information for us, and then we're going to combine that GeoJson file with the COVID-19 data that we collect. Well, the COVID-19 data that we collect will be coming from Johns Hopkins GitHub. What we're going to be using, instead of an API, we're going to be using a CSV file. This CSV file has the information that we need, and one of those pieces of information is the number of confirmed cases. A CSV file, this is not what a CSV file looks like, but if we want to take a look at what a CSV file looks like, it looks like this. It has rows, and each row represents a country except for the first one, which is the header, and the data inside there is separated by commas. So we always know the position of where the country name is or where a certain number is based on the number of commas that we find in the file. And we're going to make this even easier because we're going to use something called pop-up parse, which is going to make this seamless and only take a couple of lines of code versus maybe 20 lines of code to write it yourself. If you want to see how we link this data together, I've created another little expansion over here. To link this data together, the map data and the COVID-19 data, well, we need a common piece of information. So every country can have a name, but maybe it's spelled different. Instead of United States, it's US or whatever. So to facilitate this, to make sure that we have the same names, what's awesome about the COVID-19 data and the map data is they both contain an ISO 3 standard, which basically means that they're using 3-letter country abbreviation names. So instead of United States of America, it's USA. And these are agreed upon, which means that this will match and this will match. If we take a quick little look over here at our COVID-19 data and we scroll all the way over, go back one over there, scroll over and zoom in, you'll see that it contains an ISO A3. And these are the 3-letter abbreviations for each country. Our map data, which I haven't shown you yet, will also have an ISO 3 value. And that's how we're going to link that information together. If you want to learn even more about GeoJson and maybe even building a simpler React map, feel free to check out my other tutorial using React Leaflet. Step 1, let's go ahead and create an app. We're going to use the npx create react app command, and let's call this COVID-19-map. Our project created, let's go ahead and open it up inside Visual Studio Code. At the command line over here, type code, type the name of the project that we created, COVID-19 map, hit enter, and you'll have your project opened up inside Visual Studio Code. Before we do anything at all, let's just double check that our React application is running as expected. To do that, we're going to want to run the command npm start. To do that, we need our terminal. 2 ways to get to your terminal. You can hold Control and hit the button beside the 1 tilde. So 1 and tilde will Control and tilde will open it up. Or you can go to terminal over here, click new terminal, and it'll open up at the bottom of your screen. So let's go ahead, type npm start, make sure that our application starts up and that we're in a good development state. So there's our previous application that was built, but we're building our new one. And here we are. We have React running and we're in a known good state. Next, let's go ahead and get that GeoJson data that I was talking about earlier. I'll be providing this URL in the description. This is where we're going to be getting the GeoJson file that we're going to be using. And we're going to download it and put it inside of our project. So countries over here, there's a list of countries here coming from datahub.io. Go ahead and click that down button over there and that'll download the file. Once you have that file, find the location on your computer. Go back to your Visual Studio, and what we're going to do is inside the src directory over here, create a new folder, call it data, and inside that data folder, drag and drop that country's GeoJson file. So there we are. We have the GeoJson file that I spoke about earlier. It has many countries in here, as you can see, and each country has properties. So this property called admin over here gives us the country name. And we also have the ISO A3 name as well for that country, which we're going to be using to link back to the COVID data. And this is all inside the properties area. Then we also have that geometry data, which is used to draw the country. We don't have to worry about that because React Leaflet will manage all of that for us. This file over here that we've imported, we have one more step to do, is just to rename that file. I'm going to rename that file to JSON so I can import it and then use that object. So just rename it to .json. And now we have our GeoJson data in our project. With our GeoJson file handy now, let's go ahead and create some components. In the src directory over here, go ahead and create a brand new folder. Call that folder components. Inside components, we're going to add that first component that we talked about earlier, That first component that we talked about earlier is called COVID-19. So over here in components, add a new file, covid19.jsx. And what we're going to do here is I am going to be using some snippets to write the code for me. So if you click over here on the side over here, and you search for simple React snippets, all you have to do is type it up here and type simple React snippets, like that. It'll find that component, so you already have it installed, and then click the install button. What's great about this extension over here, just a quick little explanation, is it lets you type a few characters and then it will automatically write that stuff for you. So let me show you how this works. We're creating a component right now. So navigating back to my document, going to COVID-19 over here, and I want to do an import. So I can type IMR. Kind of gives me an idea of what it can print as soon as I hit tab. Just type IMR and we'll type S and E because we're probably going to be using those later. Hit tab and it imported React, useStape, and useEffect. And then over here, I can just say SFC, which will create a stateless functional component. Not really stateless because we are going to use useState later, but we're using hooks. So this makes it a lot easier. So this component over here, and you can see when I did that React simple snippet, also gave me a cursor up here and a cursor down here so that I can create my function and then export my function all at the same time without having to retype that or copy and paste that. To get rid of the two cursors, you can just hit escape and then the two cursors will go away. Inside of the return, we're going to put a div and we'll just write the word map. A really simple component that we have right now. We're not using it yet. To use it, we're going to go to our app.js. Inside of app.js, first thing, let's start at the very top here. Get rid of the app CSS and get rid of the logo because we don't need those things. Inside of the app, let's delete everything inside the return. So there we are. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do an import. So go ahead and import COVID-19 from, and you can see my React snippet did it for me, but let's not do it that way. Let's do it ourselves. And we're going to import it from that components / COVID-19. And then we'll use that component over here, COVID-19. Close it. And there we are. We have our component, COVID-19. So app, just like our diagram, is going to be displaying COVID-19. Go back to our application, and there we are. We displayed the word map inside of a div. Let's go ahead and build the next part of our application. So inside of the COVID-19 component, we're going to have our loading component, and we'll also display a map if we do have data and the legend. Let's go ahead and build that loading component next. For this, we're going to be using Bootstrap. Before we can use Bootstrap though, we're going to need to install it into our packages. To do that for our application, all we need to do is go to our terminal. And you can see our terminal is in use right now. It's running our application. We could stop this, install it, restart the application, but we don't need to do that. Within Visual Studio Code over here, you can have multiple terminals, which you can select from this dropdown. So over here, I could click plus, and then now you can see I have the first one here, which is our application running. And then I have a second terminal window over here. So from here, I can type npm install, or for shorthand, you can just type I, and we'll type Bootstrap. That will install Bootstrap into our project. We can confirm that Bootstrap's installed by either looking at the node underscore modules folder, but the easiest way to confirm that it was installed is to go to our package.json. Here inside package.json, you can see that we've installed Bootstrap. To keep my terminal on the application, I'm going to go switch it back to Node over here. With the npm package installed for Bootstrap, let's go to our index.js file, and we're going to import Bootstrap over here, since it could be used by any part of our application. What we'll do is we'll go import Bootstrap, go into the distribution folder, go into the CSS folder, and then inside there's going to be a file called bootstrap.min.css. You can see we're compiling with no errors. Now we can go back to our COVID-19 application. If you remember, we don't want to really display the word map here. What we'd like to do is show a loading spinner. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create another component. So just like in our diagram, we have COVID and then another component called loading. So in our components folder, go ahead, click new, go loading.jsx. We can go ahead and import using our shortcut over here. And we'll just do imr. So we're going to import React. And then we'll just create a stateless functional component. We'll call it loading. You can see I got two cursors. Hit escape over there so that we only have one cursor. And then if we want to, we can just quickly test this. So loading, we'll save it. Go back to our COVID-19 application over here. Let's do an import. They're in the same directory. So all we have to do is say loading, loading, and then from ./loading. And I've noticed a typo over here. So what I'm going to do is rename this file to capital L. And then over here, go back to loading. Or go back to COVID-19, and that's capital as well. Perfect. So in our COVID-19, let's go ahead and just return that component. So we go loading / self-closing. If we go inside there's a div. All it says is loading at the moment and doesn't really do anything special. Let's take a look at what our application's doing. There it is. It says loading. That is it. We want something that looks a little bit nicer than that. So what we're going to do is we're going to use Bootstrap in order to create a spinner on our screen. Let's see how we can do that. Go to Bootstrap over here. So if you go to that URL for Bootstrap, getbootstrap.com. Easiest way to do this is to go to documentation. Inside of documentation, we can search for spinner or we can type loader. Doc is pretty good at finding components that we need. And here's spinner. So Bootstrap has various spinners over here. We've added the CSS to our project. And what I'd like to do is create a spinner using these flashing ones over here, or they call them growing spinners. Pick one of the ones over here that you like, one of the colors or whatever. So I'm going to go with the green right over here, success. You see it goes class is equal to spinner dash grow text success. And if it's unable to display the image, it would display text that just said loading. But for now, we don't have to worry about that. Let's go ahead and copy that. Go back to our application. Go back over here, and I'm going to keep the outer div. So I'm just going to replace the text. Now what we can do is paste this in. And what we want to do is rename class. So in React JSX, class doesn't exist. We have to use class name. Class is actually a reserved word. So that's why we have to call this class name in React. Click save on that. Go back over here. And now you can see that we have, if I go back to the regular size window, it's kind of small, but there you go. We have a little spinner right now letting us know that something's loading. Let's make the spinner more presentable. Right now, it's kind of just in the corner of the screen. Let's make this a little bit more interesting by adding, let's say, 2 more spinners, but we'll make them different colors. That color over here, at least with Bootstrap, is controlled through this text success property. So instead of success, we could say danger. And over here, we could say info. Info is blue, danger is red, success is green. Click save on that, and look at that. That looks a little bit better. It's up in the corner, maybe not quite where we want it. Let's take these items over here and center them on the screen, because that's where your focus is most of the time. Center of the screen, not really the top corner. To do that, we're going to do a little bit of styling. So this outer div that we have over here, we're going to add some styling. So you had these curly braces, say we're going to add some JavaScript. Then we add a JavaScript object inside there. And first things we need to do is we want to take the entire height of the screen. So we're going to use viewport height, VH. Then we're going to display, we're going to display these items using flexbox. This isn't a flexbox tutorial, but we'll be using a little bit of CSS flexbox. Don't worry if this is foreign. This is just for putting these items in the right place on the screen. So with flexbox, nothing will change yet when we say display flexbox. We're going to use two properties from flexbox. Justify content, which will control our right and left positioning. So we'll say center, go back here, and there we go. Spinners are in the center. Now we're going to move the items to the center of the screen in vertical height. Vertical height is controlled by align items. So over here, I say align items, and then center. And now our items are in the center of the screen. With our loading screen created, let's go ahead and focus in on some of the other components that we have. As per our diagram, we're going to have a COVID map and a legend when we have data. Let's go ahead and create those components. So going back to our app over here, we have COVID-19, and inside our components folder over here, we're going to create a COVID map.jsx. We're going to use our snippets just like we did before. So IMR actually just IMR, because we just need React. And we'll just do a stateless functional component. We'll call that COVID map. Hit escape to get rid of the two cursors. Type in div map. There we go. Pretty easy. Then we'll create our other component, which is called legend. So go ahead and create a brand new file. Call that legend.jsx. Legend.jsx, very same thing, IMR. So we're going to import React SFC to create that stateless functional component. Call it legend like that. Escape to get rid of the double cursors. Put that div in right there. Type out legend. And there you go. Now we have two components. We have legend, COVID map, and loading, which displays when we have no data. But how do we do that? Well, on our COVID-19 main component, we're going to have some state. That state is going to be a list of countries. So let's go ahead and add that state. Over here, we define a constant, and we're going to be pulling these constants out of our useState function. So set countries is going to be equal to useState. So useState returns an array, and the first item is the initial value. And the second item over here is going to be a function that we can use to update the state when we need to. So the initial value of countries is going to be this empty array right here. So just some square brackets. Then over here in our HTML or JSX that we return, we put a div. Let's move loading inside of that div. But before we cut that inside there, let's put these little braces. What we're going to be doing here is we have loading. And we're going to say that if countries is equal to 0, then go ahead and display loading. So the way we do that is we access our countries variable, and we say countries.length, since an array is equal to 0, and we put a question mark and we say display loading. There are countries. We'll put a div here, and inside this div, we're going to display our legend and the COVID map. So these are two components that we just created, but first we need to import them. Go back over here and we're going to import, let's import COVID map first, right there. Oh, looks like it auto-filled it for me, but we'll get rid of that and we'll type it ourselves. It's a dot since it's in the same directory, and then we type COVID map because that's the name of the file. Then we go ahead and import, and we're going to import the legend from the current directory /legend. See, since our COVID-19 is inside the components folder, we just go dot current folder, and then whatever the name of the file is that we want to import. Going back over here to our loading screen, if we were to hit save and go double check that our application works, good practice always to hit save, make sure the app works. Any errors, fix them right away, makes it much easier. So here we are, we still got our loading screen here. It's still showing our dots because we don't have any data. But over here in this div, which is the side that if we have data, we could write as data. Or just data. I'll just say data. Then all of a sudden, when this refreshes, nothing will happen. But if we go back to our state and we say we type in the name of a country, we put Canada. And we hit refresh. Oh, our loading screen goes away. So come back over here, we remove that, we're all good. To double check this again, we can leave Canada over here. And what we're going to do is inside this one over here, we can type COVID map, make that self-closing. So we're going to get rid of that part right there. And then right after the COVID map, we'll display the legend. So let's go do that. There we are. This is a lot neater. So I have Prettier installed and it just formatted my code for me. So we can see clearly right over here. If you have no countries, display loading. You have countries, display the COVID map and the legend. So at this moment, we have one country, Canada, and because we have Canada, it displays map and legend. If we get rid of Canada over here and remove it from the array, then it displays the loading. For our next task, we're going to go ahead and load our country data. Now, how do we do that? Well, going over here back to our diagram, we can see that our COVID-19 component depends on load countries task, which is responsible for getting the COVID-19 data and getting the map data and giving that back to this component. So over here in our code, we're going to be using useEffect. What is useEffect if you've never heard of it before? Well, it's kind of like component did mount and component did update. It actually fires for both of those, making it unique and a little bit difficult to use maybe at first, but let me show you how this works. If we only want this to fire for page load, we tell it that it will track an empty array, like so. So normally useEffect over here, you can give it two items. One is the function to execute when either data is updated or the page is first mounted. Well, we can provide it with an empty array. That empty array right here, this empty array, will force this to only fire once. In this empty array, we can say to track various information and data like countries. Every single time countries changes, this useEffect will fire. But if we say to track nothing, this is the same as component did mount. So if you're used to that way of doing your React, this will be very familiar. Over here, we're going to define our load method. So let's go ahead and say const load, and load will be equal to an arrow function. And inside that arrow function, that is where we're going to call load countries task. In a much larger application, we may have many tasks. So to accommodate for that, we're going to create a folder. Inside of SRC, create a folder called tasks. Tasks, we're going to go ahead and add a new file called load countries task.js. Just need to be a regular JS file. Let's go ahead and define our load countries task. We'll go create a class called load countries task. And then this class that we've created over here, what we're going to want to do is export the default load countries task. So this is what we're creating. Now going back to our COVID-19 component over here, let's import that. We haven't implemented it yet, but let's import it. And I'll show you how we can do that. That was my auto import. Let's ignore that. So load countries task, where is that? That is located in this folder, tasks. So what we need to do is we need to go up one directory and then down into tasks. How do we do that? Well, we use ... Go ... that goes up one directory. You can see it's already showing us tasks exists. From tasks, we pick load countries task. Now, how do we want to use this? So before we even finish implementing load countries task, let's see how we're going to use it. The way that we're going to use it over here is by defining it inside of load. So inside of load, we could say const load countries task is going to be equal to a new load countries task. And what I will do over here is make that lowercase right there. So load countries task, we're just going to call it load countries task dot load. Now that load function is going to be loading our data for us. So what we'd like to do is pass in a function. Let's give it the set countries function, and it'll call set countries to update our state. So once it gets that data, it calls set countries and updates it. Hasn't done that yet though. So let's go back to our tasks, and inside of tasks, we're going to define that load method. Let's do that over here. Create a load method, make it equal to an arrow function. And instead of calling it set countries, I'm just going to call it set state. Just for simplicity. Because this is called the load countries task. It has a single responsibility to update the state only for countries. So inside of this method over here, we can go ahead and call set state. And then we need to give it, well, our countries. Where are our countries? Well, our countries are in our JSON file over here. As you can see, we have this JSON file and it has all of our country data that we're going to be using to build our map. So let's go back to our task and import that. We're going to do an import and we'll say countries from, we need to go back a directory because we're in tasks up to src, down into data, and then get that countries.json file. Once we have that, we get this countries object. Well, I can use a little bit of destructuring to go in and say, you know what? I don't want that whole object. I just want this list of features. So let's go ahead and get that list of features. So here we go. I've destructured and got those features. Using those features, I can now just pass them into set state because the features are, guess what? The countries. So there we go. We have the features there. In order to display a map, we're going to have to import Leaflet and React Leaflet. In order to do that, we're going to open up our terminal. Now you can do that using Control and hitting the button next to the one, which looks like a tilde. And that will open up your terminal. Or you can go up into your Visual Studio properties there and go click Terminal and New. So what I'm going to do here is I already have a terminal open running our React project. And I'm going to click the plus button. So then we can do npm install, and we're going to install Leaflet, which is the library that we're using, but we're actually using React Leaflet. But React Leaflet requires Leaflet, so we need to install that. Let's go ahead, install that. To confirm that Leaflet and React Leaflet are installed, we can just open up package.json and look over here, and we can see that we got React Leaflet and we got Leaflet. Next, let's go ahead and set up our COVID map that we have React Leaflet and Leaflet. First things we're going to do is we're going to import that CSS. Go leaflet distribution /leaflet, and we just not need to add the .css part there. Then above the CSS, let's go ahead and do some imports. These are two components that we're going to need from React Leaflet, not Leaflet. So these two components that we're going to be using are map and GeoJson to display that GeoJson data that we have. In the return statement over here, we can delete this entire div and replace it with map. Then we're going to go ahead and add a few properties. So one of those properties is going to be style. The style property, we're going to create an object here and we're going to set a height, and that height we're going to take up 90 of the viewport height. Then we'll set a zoom level, and that zoom level will be equal to 2. We have an extra curly brace, it looks like there. Oh, I just misplaced it, so I'm going to close this one and then delete that one. You can see I have a style, a zoom, and now let's also add a center. And this is where the map will be centered on the screen. So let's go ahead, and this is just an array. We're going to center to position 20 and position 100. Think of this as your X and Y position for the map. And now that we have this map, we can go back to our screen over here, close our developer tools, and we have this gray area. This is where the map will go. Below it, there's a legend, and we have our zoom buttons automatically from that CSS styling that we added. So now let's go over here, and in between the map, what we're going to add is our GeoJson. GeoJson has a property called data, and that data property, we are going to pass in the information that we got from our properties. That is the countries. That country information will go inside of our data here. Make GeoJson a self-closing tag. Come back over here, and you can see that now we have a map. Let's go ahead and style our map. First, let's set the background color of our map. So our COVID map over here, and I'm just going to expand this little area right here. We have a COVID map.jsx. We're going to create a file next to it. So create a brand new file, and we'll call this one covidmap.css. Inside of covidmap.css, we're going to override a color that's set by Leaflet by default. That is the gray background color. And I'm just going to get this color over here that's more ocean-like and set it to this, which is this light blue color. And then if we come back to our map, nothing changes because we're not using that CSS component yet. Go back to our covidmap.jsx, and I'll make that smaller again there. And then we're just going to import, just like we have there, we're going to import some CSS. This has to come after the Leaflet CSS. And we're going to import in the current folder, so // and then COVID-19 covidmap.css and import that. Come back, refresh our map, and you can see that we have a blue background. Now, if you recall from a previous video that these layers that were drawn over here have some opacity. That's why you can see through them and you see that blue color. Now, let's go ahead and style these countries over here so that they're not as see-through anymore and showing the color behind it. So in order to do that, we're going to be adding a style to that GeoJson object that we have there. In order to do that, we're going to go ahead and just create some properties over here. Let's go ahead and I made a little too much space. What we'll do is we'll do a const. And we're going to call this map style, and map style will be equal to an object. And that object will have a fill color. We'll just set that fill color to white right now. We're going to set a weight. That'll be the weight of the lines that are being drawn. We'll set a color, which will be black. For the lines, those will be black. And then a fill opacity. And that will be make the countries no longer see-through, and we won't see that blue color behind it. Then we need to take our map style over here and set the style, and we'll follow same pattern here because this has style first, so we'll put style here first as well and make it equal to that map style object. We'll go back to our map and have it reload, and once it reloads, you can see we're using that white background color. We have black lines to draw the countries, and this is already looking much better. Let's go ahead and add the pop-up that'll happen whenever you click on a country. So to do that, we're going to be taking advantage of the on each feature for the GeoJson component that we've added here. We're going to add another property called on each feature is equal to, and then we're going to say on each country And then we'll add a function above that, which will be a const, and it'll be on each country will be equal to, and now this takes in two pieces of information. One is the feature, we're going to call it a country. The other is the layer, so that's a thing that's been drawn on the screen, and this will be an arrow function. And then from there we can say layer.options.fill color if we want to set the fill color, which we'll be doing later from our properties. But for now, we'll ignore that. We'll ignore that step for now. We'll come back to that after. What we'll do for now is we're going to get the country name, and the country name comes from the country object dot properties dot admin. Kind of a strange name that it's called admin, but we'll grab that there, and that'll be our country name. And then what we can do with that is we can do a layer dot bind pop-up, and then we'll go ahead and do that. And then let's go ahead and display that. So I'm going to use string literals here. So I'm going to be using that beside the number 1 key, the tilde there. And we're going to have that tilde. And then inside of here, what we can do is we can actually grab properties using a $, wiggly brackets, and the name of the property. So we're grabbing that name there. Now, if we go back to our map, any country we click on, we get the name of the country. Once we've retrieved all our data, this is where we'll be applying the different colors for each country. Over here on the on each feature in the on each country, let's go ahead and define how the rest of this map will work once we have the data that we need to display the color. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is determine how this is going to work. One of the things we're going to need to do is set the fill color, which is the color that each country is. So if we go to layer.options.fill and we type in color, what we're going to end up doing is we're going to get this country object. From the country object, there's going to be properties. And one of those properties that we're going to get back is going to be the color. Right now that color doesn't exist, so if we set it and reload the map, you see it just ends up being black. But eventually we're going to have a color here available, and that's going to be the color that we determine based on our legend. If it has a lot of cases, it's going to be a dark red. If it has least cases, it'll be a lighter color. The other thing that we're going to display is not only just the country name that we're displaying right now, but beside that, we're going to want to display the confirmed number of cases, or what we're going to call the confirmed text. So we can actually, over here, where we define the name, we can also say const confirmed text is going to be equal to country.properties. So that same area, we're getting it from the properties. And then we're also going to get the confirmed, and we're just going to call that confirmed text. Then I would be able to take this confirmed text over here and put it beside the name so we can have the country name and the number of cases. Going back over here, when we click on it, it won't change anything. For now, it says undefined. But when we get to our next step, we'll start filling these values in as we retrieve that COVID-19 information. The COVID-19 information that we're going to be retrieving will be done inside our load countries task. Inside the load countries task, what we're going to do is get that COVID-19 data and then parse it and put it inside of our map on the properties of each country. So in order to do that, we're going to get that data from Johns Hopkins COVID-19 GitHub repository. In that repository, they have a branch called web data. Inside of web data, there's a data folder, and inside that data folder, there's a case country CSV. Inside that case country CSV, what we can do is, this is our comma separated value list over here, which is basically a list of rows. The first row is separated by commas and contains our header, while every other row contains all the countries and additional information for those countries, like the number of confirmed cases. And also important for us is the ISO 3 country name, which we're going to match onto our map. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to grab this URL over here. And this is the URL that we're going to use to get our data from. So for now, we can go ahead in our load countries task and we can define a variable inside here called COVID-19 data URL. And we'll set that over here. Make sure to put quotes around it. There we go. We got quotes and we got our URL. So in order to parse this information, we could write some JavaScript code. However, sometimes there's exceptions and special things that happen, and we don't really have to go to the trouble of writing that code. Lucky for us, there's an awesome NPM package called Parse. Parse is what we need. It takes CSV in and basically converts it into a JSON object. So we'll be able to take this raw CSV data over here and create a JSON JavaScript object out of it. So going back here into our Visual Studio Code, what we can do is we can install that package. So open up your terminal. Now remember, you can do that with Control and tilde, which is the key next to your number 1 on your keyboard. Now over here, I'm going to go npm I Parse. I stands for install. And type that out, and that will install our Parse package. Let's get rid of our terminal window over here so we have a bit more room to work with. To use Parse, we're going to import it at the top of the screen over here. So import papa from Parse, simple like that. Then what we're going to do is down over here in our load method. So the load method right here, this is where we're going to use Parse. So let's do this above the set state. And we're going to do papa.parse. And this method over here takes in 2 parameters. One is the URL where we're going to get the CSV data, or the location of the CSV data. The location of the CSV data that we're getting is out on the internet. And we're going to be using this URL over here, COVID-19 data URL. Then we can provide it with some options in the form of an object. And this object over here, we're going to have a few options. One is Parse normally uses CSV data, which is local. But since we're downloading it, we just need to tell it, hey, this URL that I gave you, this is not on my web server. This is somewhere else. You're going to need to download it. We tell download, true. Then we also tell it that the CSV data that we're getting back, if we take a look at it, has a header. The first row of information is a header and not part of the objects that we need. So going back over here, we set header to true. And then lastly, once we're done getting that data, we're going to need to use it. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to have this complete property over here where we're going to give it a function. And that function, I'm just going to give it an arrow function for now. This arrow function that we're going to have will get a result. And that result will contain the CSV file. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a method which is going to process the COVID data. And the reason I put this # here is to make it private. The only public method that we're going to have is load. That's the only thing that anybody who uses load countries task will only see load. They'll never see these other methods over here. So process COVID data. I'll just add that there. Now this result contains other information, but we just want the list of COVID-19 countries. We're going to call this result.data over here. Then the other modification that we need to do to our code is we don't want to set the state right away. We want to set the state later. So I'm going to delete the state here, set state. And what I'm going to do in our code for readability is I'm going to call a method or a property over here called setState and set it to null. Then when load gets called, I'm going to say this.setState is equal to setState, like that. And then we'll close that. Let's take a closer look at that data that we're getting back from Parse. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do over here is inside of process data. So let's go implement process data first, and I'm going to show you what that data looks like. Let's just define our process. COVID data, and we're going to make that equal to an arrow function. That arrow function will take in COVID countries. And then what we'll do with that is we can say console.log and we can print out the COVID countries. Remember, result is the other object here. In fact, it's probably more beneficial to see the complete object. So let's do this. Don't copy me here. This is just to show you what we're doing. So I'm going to undo this in just a second. But what I'm going to do is console.log and we're going to print out the result. So now when I go back to our application, I'm going to go open up our developer tools. So more tools, developer tools. Loading's never going to go away because we never set the state. So pop-up parse is returning this over here. It has a collection of errors if there are any errors in your objects, or like whatever this error may be over here, but nothing to be concerned with. And then it has a list of data. So this is the data that we're getting back from the CSV file. So what is this data? Well, it's an array. There are 189 objects inside here, and they all have these properties. These are the names of the properties that it has. Now remember, we told pop-up parse, there's a header. We said header was true. What does that mean? That means if we go back to our GitHub over here, that each and every single one of these columns over here is when we create a property for it. So for Afghanistan over here, when we create a property, there's going to be a country region. And then if we look at that first object over here, you'll see country region is equal to Afghanistan. And then the rest of these numbers over here will correlate. So what it's doing is it's using the header to construct an object that has the header field as one of the properties and then a value. So it makes these really nice objects. If we turn header to false over here and go back, the objects will be a little bit harder to read because now it's based on position. So go expand this, go expand data, expand that. Now you'll see that it's just numbered. And these numbers, so 0 is country region, 13 is ISO 3. If we go back to our GitHub, you'll see country region over here is position 0 if it was an array, and then you'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you'd get to 13, which is ISO 3. So that's how that works, and that's why we say header is true. Now, just to undo what we had over here, because we don't need this console log, I'm going to delete that console log. I'm going to delete this extra brace. That's only if you have more than one line of information there. Delete that semicolon. And there we are. So now we're taking our result, and we're using the dot data. We're not going to worry about the dot errors or any of those things. So dot data, and we're going to pass in COVID countries over here. Our application is just going to be in the loading state because we haven't set state yet. Close that. And then what we'll do over here, now that we have this, let's also make one other modification. So features, that's for our map. It's not a great name. I don't really like it. So I'm going to call this one map countries. And we're going to make that equal to an empty array there. And then what I'll do inside of loading, what we're going to do is say that map countries is going to be equal to features. The reason I'm doing that is actually we could just put that here. So let's do that. Don't need to do that there. There you go. That's a lot cleaner. There was no reason to me to set it on load. Might as well just set it immediately as soon as I have that information. So we're renaming it. That's all we're doing. We're saying map countries points to features, and we're going to use that just to make it easier to read while we work with it. All right, so now that we have this information, what's going to happen is load. We'll just set the set state property so that we can use it later. And then we're going to call pop-up parse. Pop-up parse, when it's done, we'll call complete. And then it'll call process COVID data. What happens then is inside of this process COVID data, we're going to loop over every single country. So every single country we're drawing on the screen, we're going to loop through them. And then we're going to apply the COVID data. So let me show you how that works. Here inside the process COVID data method, we're going to loop over those countries. So let's do that over here by going for let I is equal to 0. And then I is less than our map countries dot length. And then I plus plus. Open and close our braces, and we have our for loop. So first thing we're going to do is we are going to get that map country. And say map country is equal to this dot map countries and get that item. Then we need to get our COVID country. Our COVID country is where we're going to get the number of confirmed cases from. So we can find that country by going into our COVID countries list and then using a method called find. So this is an array method called find, and it'll find the first match. It takes in a function which it's going to use to determine a true or false value. It'll loop over each, we'll call this COVID country, it'll loop over each country until it finds its first match. What we'll do is we'll take the COVID country, and the COVID country, as we know, comes from here. And our COVID country has an ISO3 property. We're going to take that ISO3 property and we're going to see if it matches our map country dot properties. So if we go over here into our data, we can see that there's a properties. And remember, this object has properties and geometry. Properties is where we want to get the ISO3 number. So go back to our load countries, it's going to get properties, and then we're going to try and match on the ISO underscore A3, so 3-letter abbreviation for that country. And then dot save, prettier, make it look nice, or at least format it so it fits on the screen. Then what we're going to do is our map country, we're going to set some properties. One of those properties will be the confirmed number of cases, which we're going to set to 0. And then our map country, we're also going to set the number of confirmed text, which is what we use inside of our COVID map over here to display. So we go country.properties.confirmed text. Now, just also in our data over here, it's coming from here. This is properties. That's where we're going to store the confirmed text. We don't want to store it on geometry because that's where we, that's the information for how to draw that object. So we're going to put all of our new properties, which is confirmed and confirmed text, on the properties. So going back to our task over here, we're just setting up some default values. So 0, and then save that. And then once we have that information, it's not going to display yet. We still have our dots. The reason for that is we haven't set the state yet. So after our for loop that we have right here, what we can do is we can call this dot set state like that and pass in the map countries, the array. Go back to our browser over here. And now we have a default value of 0. Now let's go ahead and set that number if we have a COVID country. So if we have a COVID country, because if it doesn't find one, it gets null. So we'll have to say if the COVID country does not equal null, then what we'll do is we'll get the confirmed from the COVID country dot confirmed. So the COVID country, if we go back here, it has a property called confirmed. We're going to use that confirmed over here. We'll get that confirmed and we'll convert that to a number because it might come in as a string. So we'll convert it right there. Then what we'll do is country dot properties dot confirmed is going to be equal to this number that we just got, and then map country dot properties dot confirmed text. You can see this is exactly the same as this, but now we have the value filled in, is going to be equal to, we'll just say our confirmed for now, There we go. We go back to our map over here. Now when we click on our countries, you'll see numbers. These numbers though, sometimes a little hard to read, especially when they're really large. When they're smaller, much easier to read. So let's do a little bit of formatting on those numbers. One thing we can do is I'm going to be using this regular expression. Regular expressions can take a string in and format them. And it can do some really cool stuff. But the problem is writing a regular expression is not easy. So typically, easy to Google and find other regular expressions that people have created. So this one is format number with commas. I'm going to change X to number just so that I know it's taking in a number. Converts it to a string. And then what it does is it finds anything that's /d, which is a number, groups of 3, and that has numbers afterwards, and then puts commas. To use this, we also made it private with the hash. What we'll do is we'll say this dot format number with commas, come back over here, wrap our confirmed, let our map reload, and then when we click on a country over here, now that is much easier to read. I know that's 6 million because of how it grouped the numbers. That is one way that we can format those numbers easily using something. And I'll be pasting this exact function inside of the description. And then also you can also find this on the GitHub completed project. For the next part of our project, we want to build out the legend. Then after we build out the legend at the bottom, we can set the color of each country. I'm going to show you how clever this code is and how we're going to be combining the information that we have in the legend to actually control how that map looks. So over here, what we've done so far is we have our COVID-19 component, which goes to our load countries and gets that COVID data. Now I drew another arrow over here to our load countries task, which is going to be using the legend items and legend item to build our legend. So let me show you how this works. We so far have our tasks, our data folder, our component folder. Now we're going to add a folder for our entities. So over here, go ahead and right click and create a new folder. Call it entities. Inside that entities folder, we're going to go ahead and create a new file. And we are going to call that legenditem.js. So legenditem.js will be a class. Legend item, and this is going to represent our legend. What does our legend need? Well, let's get our constructor going here. It needs a title. It's going to need a color. I'm going to create a function called isFor. So each country can say, hey, is this legend item for me? Now this is the magic. This is the really cool part that I think everyone's going to like. Text color is just something I added as well. If you saw my original mockup there, it had white text when it got to the end because the colors were maybe not as clear. I'll pull up the final solution here so you can take a look. With the final solution over here, you can see we have text color because these colors were harder to read, so I set them to white. Otherwise, it defaulted to black. But each one has some text, a background color, and then we're going to have a function on each and every single one of these legend items that says each country can go, hey, I have 1,000. Is this one you? Is this one you? Is this one you? First one that says this one's you, it'll respond and go like, oh, okay, cool. So I'm going to use your color, which is this really light pink, and place it as my country color because I only have 22,000 and you're 0 to 499. So that is how that's going to work. Let me show you how that works in practice. So let's go here. We're just going to set up our variables here. So easy enough. We're just going to say we're just setting variables, nothing special. Take a constructor in, take some parameters, and then each one of these just gets set. So text color, and then what I'm going to do with text color is just maybe a little special here. I'm going to say if it's not equal to null, then we'll use that text color. Otherwise, we'll just set it to black. So it's not equal to that, and then otherwise the color is just set to the color black like that. So text color is an optional property. If it's not equal to null, use it. Otherwise, set it to black. So over here, our legend item is not used. We've created it. We do have to do one extra step, which is to export it so that others can use it. Otherwise, it's just stuck here. Spell that correctly. So get that legend item. Okay, there you go. Now, in the entities, let's go create another file called legendItems.js. This is going to be our list of legend items. We'll start by doing an import over here. So let's import the legend item from the current folder that we're in. So legend item right there. Then what we're going to do is we're going to have a constant called legend. Oh, we'll do lowercase legend items. And that's going to be equal to an array that we're going to be defining. We're going to export the default, which will be our legend items. Now we can build out our legend. So we're going to be building out a data structure that's going to represent our legend. These are the colors that we're going to be using. So over here, these are some colors that I've picked out, and we're going to build our list starting from the darkest color all the way to the lightest color. We have really, really red over here to represent ones that have lots of cases. More red, red, more pink, pink, and white to represent countries that we don't have any data for. So let's go ahead and build this data structure out. So simply, we're just going to have this legend items, which is going to be a list of legend item. Legend item has several properties on it, including the title. So the title for this one is going to be 1 million plus. And then we're going to set a color. So that's the color that we've predefined over here as this, which is really red. And then we're going to have a really special property called isFor. So this is a function that we're going to be creating. We'll use an arrow function over here because it's a little bit more neater to look at when you write it in line. And we're going to say if your cases are greater than or equal to 1 million. Now here's a trick to write 1 million so it's easy to look at, is you can use underscore. You can't use commas to separate your values, but you can use underscore. Cool little JavaScript trick to write nicer, neater code. Then we had one less property, and that's the text color. Remember, it's kind of hard to read, so we set that text to white. And that's something we'll have to set up in our COVID map when we do that. So we just add another legend item over here, and once again, we have a title. And I'll just take these from my previous screen here instead of typing them up, but I'll just do one at a time. We'll set the color from 500 to 999. We'll set the color there. And then the cases here. So this one's a little bit different. Our cases are going to go from 500,000 to just below 1 million. So that's why we do less than and not less than or equal. And then this one as well, we need to set that text to white because still kind of hard to read. Then for our next legend item over here, our title, which I will just take from the previous screens as not to make any errors, is going to be from 200,000 to 499. And then our color is going to have to be different as well. So that's this color over here that we're going to be using. And this color over here, we'll just put a pound and put the number. Then our cases are going to be between 200,000 and the 500. So previous number, as you can see, it goes here. This number goes here. So you can kind of trace it. 200 will be the next one that will be over. We don't need to change the text color because we're going to leave it as the default black. And then we'll add another legend item over here. So this range is going to go between 50,000 and 199. So there you go. And then we're going to set a color as well. So this one's going to be a lighter shade as we go further down the list. And then the cases, just as you can see this little pattern evolving over here, 200,000 now gets put over here and 50, and then 50 will be put onto the next line. So our very last item that we're going to create, I'll probably just paste this one in its entirety here. for brevity. And then what we have over here is between 0 and 499. We have this light color. We say the cases are greater than 0 and the cases are less than 50,000. So this time we just said greater. And the reason we did that is we're going to have one item at the very bottom in our legend that is going to be no data. If you have no data, we're just going to make that the color white, and automatically we're going to set that to true. The way this works is we're going to loop through these items starting at the top. As soon as we get one that says true, we're going to stop. So that's why we start with these numbers, because you could have multiple matches on these, and we didn't want to do that. So easier to start from the top and then work your way down to see if you're in those ranges, especially with this item being at the bottom as our default. Now that we have our legend items, we can actually go ahead and start to use them. So step one, we're going to go back to our components. We're going to go to covid19.jsx, so our component. And what we want to do is get our legend items and then give them to our legend over here. So let's do this. Let's first start with the import. We're going to import legend items from, and we have to go back a directory because we're in components into src. Then we go into the entities. Then we get our legend items. That's how we get our items. Now remember, this list starts with the highest number to the lowest. So we want to tell the legend, we want to give it the reverse of that list. We don't want to give it in that order. So up over here, right below where we define our state for the countries, easy enough. Let's go and define our legend items in reverse. We're just going to give the values in reverse. And we're just going to say that's equal to a copy of the legend items. And then we'll just call reverse, which is a built-in array function to reverse those items. Then in our legend below over here, what we're going to do is define a property. So that property we're going to call legend items is equal to legend items in reverse. So save that. Come back over here to our application. Make sure that it's still working, which it is. Let's go into our legend. So open up your legend file over here. And then inside the legend, what we'll do is we're going to use destructuring to get that from our properties, as I explained earlier. And here we'll get our legend items. Then let's print them out just to make sure that we have the right data. Always good to do little checks to make sure that you're on the right path. So print out the legend items just to ensure that we're getting them in the correct order. So they're in reverse now. So remember over here on the legend items, they're going from highest to lowest. Now we just reverse that so that we get lowest to highest. So there we go, they're just reversed. Okay, so now that we got that information there, what we're going to do is go back to our legend component, and now we can display this information on the screen. So let's do this. We're going to use a little bit of flexbox, and I'll show you how we do that. So over here, this is basically mapping our object. So what we're going to do is let's create a div, just like we had. And then for this div, what we're going to do is we're going to say style, and then style is going to be equal to an object, and that object that we're going to define will have our styles. And we're going to say display everything inside here as flex. And then those items, we're going to align items. We're going to use stretch so that they stretch across the screen. We're going to use stretch. And then inside of this div over here, what we're going to do, this is where we're going to loop over our legend items. So legend items.map, as you normally would for any items. Then inside here, we give it our arrow function. So this will represent each one of our items. So we're just going to call it item. Then inside there, give it the arrow function and define it. And legend unexpected token. So I think we'll be okay here. Just need to move this. So we've just there you go. This was the little error that we had. I was inside of that div, so this can happen. This is typo. This is normal flow of events sometimes. There you go, we're inside this div. We're between the outer div, we have our legend items, we're doing our map, and now we're about to write our arrow function over here to print out that information. So inside this arrow function, we don't really need the squiggly brackets, just use the regular round brackets. Then what we're gonna do is we're gonna put a div, close that div, do that. I could just put the number 1 there just for a second, just to make sure we're printing this out correctly. Yeah, it doesn't really show up right now, probably because of the flex, but let's not worry about that right now. So let's continue with this div that we have right here. So what we're going to do with this div over here is we need to display the item. So in here, let's go ahead and just add a span, and then inside there, we're going to do the item.title like that. So we have our item.title being displayed on here. So there's all of our titles, no data, 0, 9, 500. So far our flex is working. We have a row of information. It's all squished together because each item hasn't been set up yet. So let's go set up all our styles that we need for flexbox to work. First things first, we're going to have this little complaint over here that we need a key for our child list. So let's go ahead and define that key. We know that these titles are unique. So what we'll do is we'll use item.title for our key and then save that, and boom, you can see no more error. What's nice is just being able to go back and forth and see things automatically working. So great that we got rid of that error. Next, let's go ahead and define that style. So that style that we're going to define right here is an object. So let's go do a few things here. So we're going to set a background color. Remember, each legend item has a background color. So background right there, and then color. And then we're going to get that color from our item dot color. Remember, that legend item has a color property. And when we created those, we set that color property. So go back to our legend over here, and then grab our item color, which we don't need to put in curly braces actually, because we're already inside these curly braces. So that's going to get our item.color, reload our page, and now we have our colors. You can see it start to build out. We still need some more properties to set over here. We're going to go inside our style, stay there. There we are. So let's go ahead and do a flex of 1. Then we're going to do a display of flex for these spans that are inside. Then what we'll do is we'll align those items by setting the flex to 1 over here. What we've done is now these items are stretching across the screen, but the text is not displayed in the center. So that text that we're using is a span. So what we're going to use is another display flex, which will then tell its children item to align. And then what we'll do for this over here is we're just going to set a few more flex properties. So let's go ahead and set the align items. So align items will be set to center. Oop, I need that comma over there. So save that, align item, center, let that reload. Won't really see anything change just yet. So then what we need to do is justify the content so that it is also center. So we're going to have our vertical over here, which you couldn't see before, and then our horizontal once we make these things bigger. So you should be able to see our horizontal justifying so that now the text is horizontally justified, so it's in the center. So now we can do a little bit more. So let's go ahead and set the color. So our color is being set almost properly, but we need to get the actual color value over here for our text. So we're going to do color like so, and then we can use the item dot What was that? That was text color. We'll go set our text color over here. You can get rid of this. We don't quite need that. So now we're getting default black colors for these ones and white colors for these ones. Then let's go ahead and set the height because we want to see that vertical alignment. We want it to look like our other one over here, which had this nice vertical alignment at the bottom, taking up the rest of the screen. Remember, we set a vertical height before for our viewport. So we're going to do that again. We set it to 90 for the map. So we're going to set this one to 10 to just make everything even. Now we go back, that will be larger. There you go. Text is kind of small, so let's go make that text a little bit more readable, or let's set a little bit of styling on there. Let's make that font weight bolder. And then let's also set the font size to be 1.5 EM. Oh, need to put quotes around that. There we go. So we got some quotes. All right, so our font weight is bolder and our font size 1.5. It should look pretty much like this one, I think. Yep, pretty close, pretty close. So this looks pretty nice over here. We're zoomed in a little bit. We can zoom out, zoom in. You can see that things change. But that's looking really, really, really nice so far. We're just to have one more step to go, and that's to color the map. Let's take a look at our diagram over here. So in our diagram, what we're going to be doing is we need to go to our load countries tasks and modify it so that when it gets the COVID data and the map data, that it actually sets the color. We don't want to do that work in the components because their only real job is to display information. We don't want them doing too much work. This would go beyond the single responsibility principle where components should try and do one thing or classes should try and do one thing. We're going to let the load countries task, who's an expert at getting data, to put this information into the data that we're going to be using to show on our components. Do this by going to our load countries task. So go to tasks, load countries task. And then what we're going to do is when we're looping through our countries in the process COVID data, is we're going to execute another method that's going to go ahead and set the color. So at the very end of your for loop, this code is getting a little bit big, but instead of adding more code inside here, what we're going to do is at the end of the for loop is we're going to set the color country. So over here, we'll call this dot set country color, and this method doesn't exist yet because we haven't created it. And we're going to give it the map country. And then down over here, below or just above format number, we can go ahead and create that function. And we're going to call it set country color as we have above. And it's going to be equal to an arrow function. And it's going to take in the map country. Then inside the body of that, we're going to go ahead and set the color. So first off is we need those legends. So let's go up over here. Let's do an import. We're going to do import for legend items from, we need to go up a directory, then into the entities, and then get those legend items. Because remember, the directory we're in is task right now, so that's why you go ... brings you back up to src, then down into entities, and then get that object. So there we are. We save that over there. Then in the set color country, this is where we can start to do our magic. We have the confirmed cases. Remember, on the map country, we say properties.confirmed. So we got that number. So that's why we created that number and added that number there, because we could use it. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to say const. We're going to look for a legend item that's for this country. So we're going to go legend items dot find. So we're going to find the first match. And that takes in an arrow function, and we're going to give it the item. Instead of calling it item, we could call it the legend item. And then the legend item, we're going to ask a simple question. We're going to say legend item, is it for this map country dot properties dot confirmed cases? Is it for that? That's the question we're going to ask, and it's going to give back an answer. So for each one of these, we're going to find the first one that says, yep, I'm the legend item and I represent that particular number of cases. So then if that legend item does not equal null, then what we can do is we can return, or not return, what we can do is we can say country.properties. So my map countries.properties color, now we're going to be setting that color, is equal to the legend item dot color. So the legend item will give us the color. If we go back into our COVID map over here, when we have our function on each feature, on each country over here, you'll see that one of the things that we did is we said country.properties.color. So back in our load task, we just set that value. So if we go back to our map, there we are. This is our map with all the colors filled in for the various countries, showing the numbers. All we had to do was set this property over here. If I get rid of that code that we just wrote, put it back, all the countries will go back to being the color black. Go back over here, uncomment that code, go back, and we just asked each legend item, hey, do you represent that color? Somebody said yes, and then we set the color for that country. Now we have this Choropleth map over here showing the various COVID-19 cases across the world created with React Leaflet, Parse to map that data from COVID, following this well-architected application. The nice thing about this is that when you look at these components, for example, you take a look at our COVID component, it's pretty small. It doesn't have much information. It just has a load method, which asks the load country's task to do something. Then we have our COVID, we have our loading if we have no data. We have our COVID map to display the countries. And if we look at the COVID map, it's actually pretty small. Like there's not a lot of code inside here. At most, we have our on each country over here, which is on each feature. And all it's doing is setting properties. It's not doing any computations or anything. Then we have our legend. Our legend, pretty small too. There's a lot of HTML for flexbox, but I mean, there's no logic inside here. All we do is ask our legend item and each item for its title, for its text color, and not much beyond that. Our loading is actually really simple too. And our legend items. Legend item, we have a clear structure of what it looks like. Legend items as well, we help define this data structure. And then our task arguably could be one of our larger objects, and perhaps we can do a little bit of refactoring here, but I think it does a really great job. End of the day, you end up with a solution that looks like this, using this setup and this data structure. One last thing that we can do with our map over here is you can see we use these different shades of red, but based on the way that we set this project up, we could actually go ahead and change all these colors. So check this out. This actually is kind of cool. We could go purple, blue, orange, yellow, green, why not? And then we can leave that one as white, come back to our map. And because our legend and our map are in sync with each other, we get these different colors. And let's also maybe change that white one as well. Over here, we'll just say pink. See how that looks. Perfect. Check it out. Because we build our legend and our map in together, they both are aware of the colors. Our map is getting the colors from the legend, so therefore they're always going to be the same. The places with 500 to 999 will be marked over here as blue on the map. Anything that's purple will be these colors. So it's kind of neat how the two work together, and then at the end of the day, you can do some really interesting stuff with the colors if you want to, and customize it to however you want that map to look. If you enjoyed my tutorial, please subscribe, like, and share.